Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate celebrating the 46th anniversary of the October War victory. As we did see in the report, Dr. Heba, about the speech of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, he highlighted that the 1973 October War victory for Egypt against Israel is a unique demonstration of the nation's will for the war in 1973. And you can tell us more about before that, throughout the history of Egypt, the will of the Egyptians, and afterwards. How do you see that?
If we are going to start with what the president said, that this war sort of crossed with the people from despair to hope.
Yes.
Okay. I think the glory is what's before the war. The preparation, and immediately after 1967,
yes.
Any nation who had great hopes, and then it had this setback that suddenly we lost the battle. I will not say we lost the war, we said we lost the battle, but the Egyptian people demonstrated that they are different. And I think this difference, without any chauvinism, comes from the fact that we have a 7,000-year civilization.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that this balance or this contradiction between despair and hope exactly started in 1968 with the war of attrition. I think this is it. When we realized that we did lose a battle, but we are able to fight, and we are able to gain some victories, and we are able to surprise the enemy. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things the president will say, this is a glorious day. I think this is the best day. Mm-hmm. There is even something in the air. We'll go a little bit romanticizing the situation. We'll say something in the air is different. Yes. On the 6th of October every year. Mm-hmm. It's not just the will. It's just that believing in the ingenuity of the Egyptian people, whether the armed forces or the people themselves. Mm-hmm. They proved that they are unconquerable, as we can say.
Mr. Mohamed, how did you see the speech of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in general on the occasion of celebrating the 46th anniversary of the October War victory?
Commenting on the speech and what my dear friend Dr. Heba said.
Yes.
When we say the will of the nation, for me, the nation here is not only the Egyptians. The nation is the Arab nations. That's what was demonstrated on the second day or the third day of the setback, as we called it. All the Arab nations, all the Arab peoples in the East and the West, including, of course, the Egyptian people, they demonstrated their will, rejecting the idea of defeat. Mm-hmm. Yes, mm-hmm. We are defeated from the military point of view, but still we have our will, still we have our people, and in the same time, they demonstrated in the streets of the Arab cities, you see, in order to support President Gamal Abdel Nasser to stay in power, not for the sake of Nasser himself, yes, as a person, no, as a person to be responsible for the next stage of the situation. Because the first stage was rejecting the idea of defeat. Then we have the attrition, as she said, the attrition stage of the attrition war. The attrition war witnessed very important measures. The first measure is rebuilding the Egyptian army. Mm-hmm. And including, in particular, university graduates. That is, we are living the new war, the new concept of the contemporary war. At the same time, the mobilization of the military power was not only Egyptian, it was all over the Arab world. And we received from Kuwait, from the Sudan, pilots from Iraq, especially from Algeria. Mm-hmm. Why? we were being repaid our efforts, which we supported these people all over the 50s and the part of the 60s, when we were trying to support them for the independence. As you remember, and all of us remember, that Egypt, Cairo, started supporting the Algerian peoples, the Arab Algerian people, since 1954. And then when the setback took place, people knew that the president of that time in Algeria, Hawari Boumediene, went directly to Moscow. He met Mr. Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union, and he pushed the Soviet Union to provide Egypt with as far as weapons, the most up-to-date weapons which the people in Egypt needed. And they say, and we knew that he was ready to present a check of millions and millions of dollars in order to pay for these weapons. This is what is very important. When the Egyptian people, for their will, knew all these things, I think that was a kind of a push in order to solidify their determination to rebuild and to start the war of attrition as well.
Yes, Dr. Heba, you said that this is one of the best days in the history of Egypt. Where does it rank, in your opinion, in the history of battles and wars that Egypt got into?
Okay, for me, it's the best day. But Egypt as a nation had lots of best days, okay? And I think if you're going to, this is what I like to do. And I like to see each and every event that happens as a continuum of the history. There's nothing which is called something started from the scratch. No, it's a continuum. For example, if we take the Egyptian army, always we listen to the people saying that it has never been an an army that invades, okay?
Yes, yes.
And it's always defending, okay? So I heard this ever since I was a child. I read it in books. And then I wanted to know, why is this? This is the truth. Egypt at the ancient time, for 3,000 years, was the superpower. And imagine if you have all this power, all this wealth, all this in the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom in particular, and the New Kingdom. If you have this power and still you didn't go and invade one single country. Why? Because this is the creed of the Egyptian army, and it's the ideology and the creed of the Egyptian people. Ancient Egyptian people believed that if you want to have resurrection, you have to be buried in Egypt. It's heaven on earth. You don't need to go anywhere. Wherever there is there is somebody who is sort of threatening Egypt, yes, you go and you defend. That's why I say this war in particular reminds me of three heroes. So Sadat is actually, Nasser and Sadat, they are a combination of three heroes of ancient Egypt. War of attrition is exactly what happened before Ahmus, when we had the Hyksos. We had Seqnen Ra and Camus, and this is exactly what Nasser did. This is not giving up, building, and then came Ahmus, who is like Anwar Sadat in this case, and finished the war. But we cannot say that Ahmus is the one who did it all. No, he had before him
and he had help from his family
and exactly,
his grandmother.
And his mother Yahutub.
Yes.
So we will not say that just Ahmus in this case. No, we will go to Tutmosis. What is I was reading, watching a documentary and said, and it was the BBC documentary, and it said that the glory of the Egyptian war, October War, is the surprise element. And how can you surprise somebody who is 200 meters away from you? This surprise element dates back to Tutmosis III, the first person in the military world in ancient Egypt who had this surprise effect. That's why he's being taught in military academy. So again, this is Tutmosis III. And then we have this military equipment and forces that being built reminds me of Ramses II with Qadesh. And he had, these military chariots, which was one of the warfare experts say that Ramses used military chariots that's most likely like an Apache in its effect. So these mobilization of the whole nation for the sake of war. لا صوت يعلو فوق صوت المعركة. Okay, this reminds me, no voice is louder than the voice of the war. This is what Ramses II did. And this is what he did later on with the peace treaty with the Hittites. So I think, just look at it, this is Egypt. Lots of downs, but lots of ups as well. It's a nation which is never broken.
Yes, and this takes us to the creed of the Egyptian army. How do you see it, Mr. Mohammed, in the history of Egypt, more specifically on one of the best days in the history of the country, on the 6th of October in 1973, and ever since, up till now in 2019, fighting terrorism as well?
Well, first of all, I like the analogy which she did along history. But I'll try to attract the attention to something which took place during the attrition, the war of attrition. This something is the coincidence of going ahead in rebuilding the military, in the same time going ahead in the most important project, the national project, which is called the High Dam. We finished the High Dam according to its international and technical standards as best as we can during the war of attrition. This means that the Egyptian people, along the history which she demonstrated or she explained to us, the Egyptian people have this kind of awareness that yes, you can fight, but in the same time you have to build. And that is the slogan which was prevailing at that time during the war of attrition, a hand which is carrying the weapon or the arms, and the other hand is trying to build. And that is practically which took place during at that time. And in the same time, it was a kind of what? A translation of the common saying which says that the domestic and internal policy has its translation in the foreign policy. So when our domestic policy, our internal policy, was the policy of Arab nationalism, African solidarity, and in the same time fighting for the liberty and the emancipation of the African countries, in the same time participating as a leader in the non-allied movement. All these things, we reaped the fruits of all these efforts which we had did during the early 60s and the 50s. We reaped the fruits during our efforts in the war of attrition. At the United Nations, most of the African countries cut their diplomatic relations with Israel in the same time. As I said, we had a lot of support, financial support. The oil countries in the Arab world threatened, and it was a very serious threat, to cut any supplies of oil to the people who supported our enemy. All these things with each other, as I said, the struggle of the Egyptian people on the foreign front or the outside front, it was a translation of the struggle of the Egyptian people on the domestic front.
If we can switch to 1973 and the media outlets back then in the 70s supporting the Egyptian army and supporting the president of Egypt, how can we have a comparison, a quick comparison between what happened in 1973 in terms of support to the state, to the Egyptian state in terms of war, and what we have now?
Before we go to
Yes.
this point, I would like to talk about our war on terrorism.
Yes.
You were talking about the army and the creed of the Egyptian army. It's the same, defense. Okay, Egypt is the one country in the whole world which had the same borders ever since Narmer. So you're talking 5,000 years ago. And all the time there has been an Egyptian soldier fighting for the country. In the Old and Middle Kingdom, it was one soldier to each 100 person. In the New Kingdom, it was one soldier for each 10 person in need. So if the country needs, it's the whole people is part of the army. This is just to talk about the war on terrorism. Now it's the same. They are ready. Egyptian army is ready to fight, to keep and to
there's
protect.
support from the people to the army and vice versa.
It has been always this support, and it's very important
It never
to
changed
keep
in the
it.
history of Egypt.
Do you know that during the period in which we call it the first intermediate period, in which it was complete chaos, no army, nothing, but still the Egyptian people managed with one army commander to come back again, Mentuhotep II, and unify Egypt one more time. So it's always the army. In case of problems, the people look for the army. This happened in January, and it happened 2011, and it happened in June 2013, and it will be always the case. We are safe as long as we have our army. Okay?
Yes.
Back to your question. I don't think that there's anybody who is more capable of answering about media more than Mr. Kholy, because he was there. I mean, I read this on books. I watched documentaries, but he was part of it. He was part of the media. As for what's happening right now, I think the problem is that the people is under attack of what we call the fourth generation war. And I think this is the problem. If you allow people to tamper with the minds, I'm not going to say who is tampering with the mind, but if you are the enemy to tamper with the minds of the people, this is the real danger. Always the president say we are one unit. It should be the case, we should be one unit, but how to keep this one unit, this is the idea. I remember that I read in one of the books, this military propaganda thing, or military psycho-op as they call it, thing is very old. We had it in Narmer Palette. 3,200 years ago, 5,200 years ago, when he had this smiting, smiting the enemy pose with the mace on his one hand.
Yes,
and it's the same pose that's now on the military defense minister. Defense ministry.
Yes.
Okay, it's the same pose there. It has been the same pose of Egyptian rulers. I'm there to defend, okay? The problem is that, as the Art of War, this book for Sun Tzu, the Chinese philosopher.
Yes.
This was
not a big book.
500, exactly, 500 BC. Yeah. He said something. He said, you don't have to conquer or destroy the military of your enemy.
ممكن the leader.
Destroy their willingness to fight.
Yes.
And this is the problem. Now they are destroying the willingness to fight. Will we allow them to do so? This is the question.
So, willingness to fight. But I will be returning to the main point here. You lived in those times.
I was so young at that time.
Yes, exactly. But you lived there.
In the radio, Voice of the Arabs,
Yes.
Sawt al-Arab. You see, it was a double suffering. You were suffering as a young man, as an Egyptian and Arab young man. In the same time, we were suffering, me and my generation, that people lost confidence in what we were doing, because people unjustly treated us as liars at that time. Although,
as professionals.
yes, I mean, because we were receiving statements
Information or data?
from the
Yes.
military command at that time, you see, announcing that we had scored a lot of victories, and that was absolutely untrue. But we didn't know that, and we didn't have the means to verify, you see, all these things. And therefore people lost interest in the Egyptian media, the Cairo media, all over the Arab world. So in order to regain this confidence, I think we passed a very hard time. And our outlet was to open the media to, our channels to what? To very frank, open dialogue, although painful also in the same time. We used to receive letters. At that time, everything was through letters.
Yes.
From our envoys, students studying in Europe and in America. It was so painful. It was so hurting us and hurting the country. You see, because these people were so desperate and they felt...
they were hurt.
Yes, so hurt, you see. And therefore, we announced these things in our programs, and we tried to make some dialogue between us and them. And let me tell something, maybe, that sometimes the big bureaucrats at that time, our bosses in the ministry, were so criticizing us and were so harsh about that we are not good and we are exposing the country. But the minister at that time, Mr. Mohamed was encouraging us behind the scenes and tell us, don't care about what he said. You see, the undersecretary or the
other officials,
other officials who are under him, and go ahead. And then we received a request or an order from President Nasser himself, that was in 1969, to prepare a report about what's going on in the Arab world, the public opinion, either in the Arab world or outside the Arab world, in order that he should learn and know what's going on, especially among the young people who were hurt with the setback. That was for us very difficult, but I think in 1969 we felt that people are coming to us again and trying to trust us in what we were doing after this ordeal which we felt.
So that was between 1967 and 1973.
Yes.
What happened after 1973 October War victory for the media outlets?
We were so, proud, and we had a kind of catharsis, you see. But not only as media people, as citizens. You see, all
as
of
Egyptians.
us. Egyptians, we are Egyptians, and in the same time we were Arabs, you see, especially in the voice of the Arabs, we felt this Arabism, the spirit of Arabism, and so we were very important. It was very important. In the same time, we were monitoring what the artists at that time, the big artists at that time, especially Kulthum, you see.
Yes.
These people devoted themselves, especially Kulthum, devoted themselves to go around the Arab world and even to go to France in order to collect money, hard currency, in order to provide for the military change which we had to do. All these things was encouraging us as young people that we are doing our best because Kulthum and the others are doing their best.
Historically in Egypt, the element of surprise was evident in terms of war. And of course, former president or the late president Anwar Sadat took the decision to be waging the war against Israel on the 6th of October, the 10th of Ramadan,
Yom Kippur.
At 2 p.m. What about the timing? How do you see it historically in this scene?
I think the timing, I was talking to one of the military experts, and he was explaining that the timing had to do with the sun and the location of the sun. Okay, so I think they planned it so carefully. The secrecy, the ability to, can you believe we are talking 200 meters and you surprise your enemy? And I was watching something for Ariel Sharon, and he said something very strange. He said bluntly that one of his military officers came to him and he said to him, "They are doing it, they are unstoppable. So we cannot stop the Egyptians." So this is it. Historically speaking, this has been the technique or the strategy of Thutmose III in Megiddo War, and that's why it's, as I said before, this is something that's being all the time taught in military academies throughout the world.
And if we depended on the sun, or the location of the sun, this means that we also depended on the history of ancient Egypt, because they idealized the sun, and
I think it had to do with the vision and the ability of the other. I'm not a military expert, but I know for sure that they had a reason for every single thing, and this is something that the military, the Egyptian military, the Egyptian armed forces, is well known of. They have always one plan, and plan B, and plan C, and plan 100, okay? So they are always ready, and that's why I think they are the Egyptian army.
The lucky coincidence that it was Ramadan.
Yes.
And no one
was it a coincidence?
Can imagine. Yes.
It was Ramadan.
It was Ramadan.
But was it a coincidence?
But I mean, Yom Kippur.
Yes. The Yom Kippur.
Yes.
It was Ramadan. In the same time, no one can imagine that there will be a military effort or military battle on the part of the Muslims in Ramadan, let alone 2 o'clock by noon in Ramadan. You see, in the same time, I think people, Israel and a lot of people, were not taking, frankly speaking, President Sadat so seriously.
Exactly.
That was another thing. Another good coincidence, happy coincidence. You see, he proved that he is broad-minded, he is so skillful. At the same time, I think they did something. They gave a lot of officers leaves, permission to leave, you see, and some people, some of them went for Al-Umrah. At that time to Mecca. This means that there is it was a relaxed thing. In the same time, we were so happy that our enemy was not taking us seriously.
Underestimating us.
Under the arrogance, because they were living on the results of our shock in the June affair. You see, so they were living the same thing. Because as you know, and all of us now know, that Moshe Dayan, at that time, their war officer, our minister, they said that he was just sitting beside the telephone, waiting for a call from Cairo to surrender altogether. That didn't happen. But this was their concept, that we don't think that these Egyptian people, in the same time, their overconfidence in the Barleaf line, which we did, and they didn't know that there is a kind of our Christian genius, Baqi Zaki, may God sacred his soul. Well, this officer, he was an engineer, and he gave the military, the trick of using water in order to destroy the Barleaf. All these things, you see, with each other, it was luck, good coincidence. In the same time, very, very sophisticated effort to prepare for this thing, which is called the
Can
October.
you remember the days before the 1973 October war victory?
The what?
A few days before the war victory.
That's it.
Ah.
Yeah,
no, the days that you lived and worked in here.
Yes, at that time I was in the office of the president at that time. So I didn't.
That is a very
follow.
important place to be.
Yes, yes, at that time.
So it should be confidential.
Yes, I guess. While Mr. Kholy is talking, it strikes me something else. One of the things that resembles, let's say, a liking between the ancient Egypt and the modern war is the bar-leaf line. And the fact that it was something for the Israeli, they always said that it's something that the Egyptian will never be able to defeat it. This, again, reminds me of what happened with the Hyksos when they introduced the chariot, and they thought that we will never be able to defeat them. What did the Egyptians do? Like this engineer, the ancient Egyptians too had engineers, and they took the chariots of the Hyksos and they developed it. So it's, instead of a big heavy chunk, it became dismantled into very light things. So this ingenuity of the Egyptian military is
so
always
Baqi inherited this sophisticated skill.
This is one thing, and I think this surprise thing, Moshe Dayan was never expecting this to happen. And he said that in the documentary in the BBC, he mentioned that it's that Sadat was always bluffing. So I think, and saying that things he will do when he announced that there will be war, nobody believed him. Because he did it before, he announced it before. I think this was the cleverness of Anwar Sadat.
Yes, and we will be turning to the younger generations who should be knowing more about the October War victory for Egypt against Israel on the anniversary of, or the 46th anniversary of the October War victory for Egypt. We will be having the upcoming reports, so let's see it.
The glorious victory of October War was not only a restoration of land, but also a revival of a spirit that was thought of as diminished and blurred. It is the spirit of patriotism and loyalty that was pivotal in this great victory. After the defeat of June 1967, the victory of October came to prove that the army of Egypt is the best of all. They are the loyal sons of Egypt who were able to erase defeat and turn it into a glorious victory. The Egyptian people impressed everyone with cohesion and tolerance and patience to face all economic difficulties until they achieved the victory of October. Following the 1967 war, there has been a political, economic, and military status that threatens the Egyptian state. However, with top secrecy, commitment, persistence, and collaboration with the political leaderships, the military institutions had committed itself over 7 years to reconstruct its infrastructure, train its personnel, and draw up a comprehensive strategic military plan. The spirit was so high that the military personnel only were paid half of their salary to support the war effort, as the Egyptian citizens have given up their basic needs to help soldiers return Egypt's dignity, and due to this spirit, we have achieved the victory. Under the Western and American economic siege, Egypt succeeded in managing the war economy, achieving victory for the Egyptian will in face of attempts to break it. The spirit of October War succeeded in facing economic crisis and adoption of the economic open door policy supported by the popular solidarity, as some workers donated their incomes to support the war effort. The 6th of October War in the Arab memory represents an experience of national success. Since the beginning of the preparation of that war, Egypt has summoned the requirements of Arab national security and strategic coordination between Egypt and Syria militarily, Saudi Arabia economically, Algeria weaponry, and Morocco politically.
راجعين راجعين رافعين رايات النصر سالمين سالمين حالفين بعهد الله نادرين نادرين واخدين حياتنا لمصر باسمك يا بلدي لفنا يا بلدي جيشك وشعبك نروح بالتحدي أرضك وزارك شمسك وقمرك شارك ونباتك سنينك وهرمك بدمي أفاجك وصد الأعاجك وأفدي بروحي وعيونك راجعين راجعين رافعين رايات النصر سالمين سالمين حالفين بعهد الله نادرين نادرين واخدين حياتنا لمصر شرفك يا بلدي عز كرامتي غالية حقي أمانة رقبتي حبك مسامحك خيرك وكرمك بنخلك وطرك صبرك وصارك صحوي حنانك وباستشهادك أسجل نشيدك تاريخك يا مصر.
Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate and the very special episode celebrating the 46th anniversary of the October War victory for Egypt against Israel. As President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said today that the younger generations need to know what happened in 1973 and before that. How do you see such a step and how can it be done through the media outlets today?
I think one thing should be done is that Maspiro should be in charge of this. Nobody is as able as this body to address the young people and to address the Egyptian people in general. But first we need to rebuild the trust in the Egyptian media, and which is already being rebuilt bit by bit.
Yes.
And we have to know how to address the Egyptian people, young and old as well, because it's anyone who is 46 years old has never been there. So we need to have more documentaries. I think because Israel is doing a lot of documentaries. The BBC is doing many documentaries about the war, 6th of October war. And I think it's high time for us, because we have the caliber, we have the people who did it, we have the people who witnessed it, we have the media persons who were there. And I think each one of them has something to say to the young as well as the old, not just the young. So first of all, okay, documentaries, programs, songs. We were talking off air about the songs, the beautiful songs. We need more songs. We need to tell this, we need to rewrite history books. So the Minister of Education has to rewrite the history books of Egypt. We need to have this identity to make the student feel, or the young person to feel very proud of being Egyptian, to feel exactly what Mustafa Kemal felt when he said, if I were not Egyptian, I would have wished to be an Egyptian. This is not just a statement. It has to be felt, and it has to be done through knowledge. Tell the people the great things which the Egyptian army has done, and automatically they will appreciate it. They will, because the truth, it's the truth. Nothing as great as what the Egyptian army in this glorious day. We need just to know. And it's okay for us to know and to listen, and because I think it will, you know, these words, this word PRIDE, this pride thing will be there by knowledge.
Yes, Mr. Mohamed, it was a very tough place to be, that the people lost confidence.
Yes.
in the media outlets, in the Egyptian radio, and it wasn't a television back then, or it
There was a television,
for 8 years.
But the radio was everything.
Yes, the radio was bigger
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
Losing confidence, that was a very tough place to be. But how about losing confidence in the Egyptian state? How can we be rebuilding confidence and rebuilding or regaining trust, as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is doing, as the Egyptian government is doing under his tenure? How can it be right now, after what happened in 2011 and in 2013? How do you see it?
We are living in a very severe time in comparison with how it happened even in 1967. At that time, as you know and as all of us know, the radio was the main principal means for communication, and then the television and the newspapers, okay? But now we are facing a war by proxy. This is a very important thing and very dangerous thing, which we call now, as you know, when we write about these things, the fourth generation war and these things, you see. The problem of this war that you lose confidence. I mean, the new generation, they lose confidence in everything. They don't believe in anything. So we have to first, as Dr. Heba said, we have to regain our confidence, and especially to convey this regained confidence to the new generations. We have the veterans until now, thank God. The veterans who, some of them have passed or waged the war, either in the media or in the military itself. These people, it is not enough to take them to see people on the television or in the radio. I think we have to arrange for these people to go all over our country, from Kafr Sheikh and Alexandria to Aswan, you see, in what we call Qusur al-Thaqafa, the centers for culture all over the place, in villages, you see, in primary schools, not in the universities only,
yes.
you see.
Targeting children.
Yes, in order to be with the people, and people will treat them as icons, with respect, with love and appreciation. This is very important, you see. And even she gave me the idea now today that why not linking what happened in 1976, 67 and in 1973 with what used to happen during the pharaohs, during the ancient Egyptian people, you see. This gives the people some confidence that it is not new for us, that our people is trying to regain confidence and they're trying to defend the country. It happened a lot of times and it is recorded. And when we have references, don't give the reference from Egyptian references. Give the reference from international scientists. Talk about Toynbee, talk about Breasted, you see, because these people recorded what she said about in the pharaonic eras, you see. In the same time, we have to encourage our artists to go ahead, because after the war of attrition and after the October War, there was a kind of momentum, waves of creative, artistic masterpieces. You see, until now we are still living on these things. And now we are celebrating the 94th anniversary and repeating what used to be done during at that time. We didn't add new things, new creative works of art to this thing. We need to have a comprehensive look at trying to impart on the new generation what the lessons, either severe lessons or the lessons of victory and achievement, which the people did at that time.
Yes, and hopefully the new generations will be producing talents and soldiers and people who love Egypt and love the Egyptian
army. They are our
army,
hope. They are our hope for the future.
One last thing. If we want to...
30 seconds.
If we want to fight fake news, fight it with the truth.
Yes.
And we're doing that right now.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Heba Nayef, the Vice Dean of the Instructional Affairs at the College of Language and Communication. Thank you very much for being with us today on a special episode of the Daily Debate. And Mr. Mohamed Kholy, the international media expert, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
On a very special episode celebrating the 46th anniversary of the October War victory for Egypt against Israel. Thank you for watching and goodbye.